So today's painting is ripples number 2. These are fairly busy ripples, but also fairly small. So we are starting with a dirty palette. We have some magenta here that we're going to use a little bit to get some purples, but I have added the warm red. It's a pyro red medium, or pyro red light. Doesn't really matter as long as you got the yellow and the red. There's ultramarine blue, and we're going to have to put down some white. And I think right now we'll just use the liquid white just because it's so much faster just to squeeze it out rather than get a palette knife out and take it out of the jar. So we're going to start by laying down the orange base color. So we want a that's way too much red. The one thing you got to remember is the red is brutally strong compared to the yellow. So I'm actually going to rinse that brush because I don't want that control how much red. This is probably not enough yellow, but we'll start. And then just creeping in that red, just because it can very quickly take over that orange. And I think that looks pretty good. So we've put in just a quick drawing so we know where to focus, getting the sky in the right color. I think that's probably enough of that, but we're just going to lay down some, this is primary yellow. Actually, it's an airlight yellow medium. Primary yellow, often what they call primary yellow, is a little bit tinted orange, which is beyond me why you would do that. If you're looking for a true primary yellow, it should have no bias in any direction, certainly not towards the orange. That when you do that, you can limit the potential greens that you can get. So we're working in both directions at the same time, which, if you're not a fast painter, you might choose to do the sky first before you fret too much about getting just bring that a tad closer. And you can see how transparent the orange and yellows are, because you can see that line still through the orange. Doesn't really matter what we do in this upper corner because it's all going to be covered with gray cloud. And so you're looking to the reference to see where you need to make sure you're getting the colors right. And right along the shoreline there, it is definitely more yellow. Really don't need to cover as much of the canvas as we are covering, but when you do cover the whole thing, it just gives you freedom when you're doing the rest of it to move things around. I think I'm going to push that orange a little bit more in through there into much redder. Let's get in more red. Now this is, I have to take into account that I'm mixing into the colors that are already down there. So we're just going back and forth to smooth out that. This is, because this is one of our rippled series, the actual smoothness of the blend is not critical, but when you're learning to paint, it doesn't hurt to practice getting those smooth blends. So we'll drop that brush and we'll come down here, and this is a dry brush now, so I'm going back and forth just to smooth that blend out. Not too worried about that line. So now we left it from an orange area, so I'll take that same dry brush and come back into the orange rather than take it right into the yellow. And we're going to need quite a bit more yellow up in there. We might as well put it in now. We'll definitely put more in when we're starting working on the sun. I like to use filberts when I'm doing skies. And I didn't work in the cloud in the wet and wet stage because the purples or grays are going to easily desaturate the yellows. So I wanted to keep the yellows and oranges pretty clean. So we're just going to start, we've got some gray happening over here, so we'll just bring in I think we're going to need a little bit more yellow down. So we're just going to take a feel, like this looks very light there, but when you get it down on that canvas, so we're just going to get a clean brush here and just work that edge. Don't get ahead of yourself. Make sure you start working those edges right away, as it's I maybe gave you the impression that there is more time than there actually is when you're doing that. So we're just going to take some of that. It's actually a little darker over that side, so we're not going to take it too far that way. So I'm just going to come over to the side here, hit some unwanted magenta. Just roughly sketching in where we think these clouds are going to be before we actually start bringing this much stronger light into that. So we're going to start putting that sun in right now. So initially we're going to start with the straight yellow light. Now we're going to add a little bit of white to that. Now the white aerolite yellow is a fairly transparent yellow. If you want a good opaque yellow, and it's only opaque so far, just because it's yellow, you can buy bismuth or cadmium. Both are quite expensive. Watch you're not buying the cadmium hue, because the cadmium hue is usually just an airline yellow with some titanium white in it. But if you add titanium white to your airline yellow, it does improve its opacity quite a bit. Titanium is one of the more opaque colors in your palette. So we're just getting that little bit of yellow glow in the sun area. We'll push that up here a little bit too. And you might wonder why I didn't do this in the first place, but it's sometimes hard to get it exactly where you want it until you get the purple there. So we'll just take some of that over there as well. And you don't want to be trying to put this on top of the purple, as it's just going to be darn hard to do. And we never want to make our life hard. Well, I don't. So we're just getting a little bit of sort of orangey glow. So I've let that dry up, certainly to the touch. And so now we're just going to put that pure white in. And the only place we'll use the pure white is right where the sun is. So we'll get back into the purples now, just doing a little bit more detail in the clouds. So we've put down some more ultramarine blue. We're going to mix our black with the ultramarine blue and red, which gives us a sort of a really nice dark purple black. And the red is a lot stronger than the ultramarine, so you're going to use more ultramarine to get it into the darker side. The ultramarine is also darker to start with, so it does help it make it a little darker. So we're just going to come in here. And one of the nice things about laying this dark down fairly early is it gives you a sense of how much light you're getting because of the light-dark contrast. Quite often when you're looking at a painting and you're thinking, oh, it needs to be lighter, lighter. It doesn't actually need to be lighter. What it needs to be is adjacent to something darker. not too worried about that because we're going to have a peninsula coming off the end there. So we'll get our KX9 100, and I mean, if you're not comfortable or don't have some sort of straight edge to do this, you can use masking tape. This doesn't have to be bang on smooth. We're smoothing out any big globs of paint there. One thing about big globs of paint, if you're a fairly smooth painting and you haven't done a lot of heavy paint strokes, those little bits of texture can catch unwanted highlights, which can be somewhat detrimental to your painting. So now we're going to switch to a number 6 rigger, and we're just going to put that very fine wind line at the back. This paint needs to be fairly liquid to get nice clean lines. We're not going to get into the fine lines blending into the oranges just yet, and we'll let that dry. Just maybe touch that transparent area there up. So we're making sure this is pretty much right below the sun. And we're putting in the yellow color first. This is just to sort of give us an idea of where things are. Now, I'm going to let's use a white chalk, it'll be easier for you to see. So I'm going to make these trees a little bit taller. And so this is probably where the water line is on this little peninsula. So we're going to stretch that down. It's not really showing all that well. Just an approximation of where we think that purple starts. Okay, so I think I'm going to start by putting these trees in. So we're just going to lay down some of this purple. It's a similar purple to what's in the sky, but a little bit darker. It may look very similar right now, but it will dry darker. And we're not being too concerned here because this is fairly solid purple coming into that, and we'll cut back in with the black after. Now when you're putting these ripples in, it's important to pay attention to the grouping. You don't have to get it exactly the same, but don't just do a whole series of random lines. They need to connect and group together to look somewhat natural. I mean, ripples can do just about anything, but if you're really good looking, you'll see how they look in the reference. That will go a long way to improving your natural appearance. It's very easy to let your brain take over what you're doing here. And don't worry about getting everyone down. We can come back and add more as we progress in the painting. It's one of the advantages of having a stay wet palette over just a regular glass palette, is because I can maintain this color on the palette. And even if I need to mix more, it's a lot easier to mix to a wet color than to a dry color because it hasn't changed. Meaning it hasn't darkened. So I've mixed up a little bit of a redder mixture here. Whenever you're doing something like this, keep your colors moving a bit. I mean, it, just darkening the wind line at the far shore to reflect the cloud. So we're just going to put a little bit of orange into the black, just above where the sun is reflecting in the water. Take some of that paint off the brush. I want to get some of the bismuth yellow down, just because that aerolite yellow is really not cutting it as far as laying down on the orange. Now the pyro red is not particularly one for opacity, but it's going to be very little. Make that top one is a little bit redder. It's an expensive color, but it's well worth the money when you need it. One just last little touch is I'm running some of this orange through the black reflection. That's using the bismuth yellow and the white with a little bit of red. So I think we're going to call this done. The next one on ripples is going to be on larger ripples or more gentle rippling in the water.